Boop 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 boop. Boop 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 boop. Boop 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 boop. Boop boop boop.
Yeah, there's like 10,000 people listening to this conversation.
Good.
Immediately.
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to say anything incriminating about yourself.
I did it. All. It's all true.
Yeah, so this is just going to be a very simple conversation. So first off, can you tell us who you are?
My name is Rob Speiden. I am a tracking specialist with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management.
And what does a tracking specialist entail?
That entails a higher skill level of tracking that applies tracking concepts and tools and techniques to looking for missing people.
Well, good. That's exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rob.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And yeah, Brittany's here too.
Yeah, I'm here as well. Yeah.
Great. All right. So let's get further into it, Rob. So tell us, I guess, the background or history of tracking, how we started utilizing that.
Awesome. So tracking is an ancient skill that goes back eons. It goes back beyond written record, beyond historical records, where society, communities, people would use tracking to figure out where the game was that they could chase down and live by hunting. They did use tracking for communal security by being aware of what invaders might have been around at the time, and that all of those skills transfer through today for hunting and insurgent border patrol protection and so forth, and search and rescue and law enforcement purposes, and.
Okay, wow. So starting back from where they would use tracking to either identify predators in the area or identify prey that they could eat.
Or prey.
I have been tracking a piece of cake for about 3 days now. Almost there.
Awesome. So you see how effective it can be.
Yeah. So with the development of tracking nowadays, right? So I would suspect that if it goes beyond written record, then it's much more of like an oral tradition that's taught. Whereas nowadays, is it still an oral tradition? Can we use books to help understand tracking? Or I guess that's why we have you.
So yes, it is still an oral tradition. There are many societies that still use tracking today that are illiterate societies or don't use writing as a means of communication, and they are some of the best trackers in the world, in all honesty. But it doesn't matter what your heritage is, what your bloodline is. Anybody can learn tracking. Basically, we have the tools and capabilities in our minds and in our body to use tracking for us. And so certainly there are multiple societies, communities that use tracking for, again, the same things for sustenance as well as protection.
Cool.
And so there are many books written on the topic, including my own, so I'm kind of biased about those. But there are probably, I'd say, about 10 or so books written on human tracking, and then many more written on other animal tracking.
Can I actually ask a question about that?
Please do.
So when it comes to animal tracking versus human tracking, is there a lot of overlap there, or is it kind of two different fields?
Yeah, in my mind, there's an extreme amount of overlap. There's such a small difference between the two where we are animals, so humans are animals, or just two-legged as opposed to four-legged or winged. But the skills, the way I put it when I'm telling people and teaching classes is the ground doesn't care. When somebody or something steps on it or moves across it, whether it's a wheel, a two-legged person, a four-legged animal, the ground doesn't care. It responds to the force that's applied to it and reacts accordingly, whether it's snow that gets stepped on, mud puddle gets stepped in, leaves, those kinds of things all react regardless of the track maker. So the skills of human tracking overlap tremendously with animal tracking, and I am also a tracking specialist, a trailing specialist for animal tracking through an organization called Cybertracker Conservation. And I will get you a link to that organization also.
Oh, that'd be great. We will definitely put up all the links on our website for people that want to look into more of this. Also you teach tracking, right?
Yes, I do. I've been teaching tracking since 1998 and studying tracking since 95, and still learning about it.
That's what most experts I talk to about their field is, that they're still trying to learn and study it.
Still learning. It's like, to me, Tracking is like any other skill that you learn. The more you learn about it, the more you see there is to learn about it.
Okay. All right. So, what are some nuances in tracking? So, let's start with, say, animal tracking, right? So, if I recall, you've tracked like coyotes and other animals before, right? So, the modern day animal tracking, what does the community look like? What are you looking for? Can you track, say, animals? I'm thinking of like, I don't know, sea lions. Are there ways to track sea lions down versus coyotes?
So let's go back to the actual word of tracking itself. To some, it means going out and looking for tracks and sign. And certainly sign and tracks of sea lions can be found when they come ashore. But I'm not too familiar with that because I live in the mountains of Virginia and we don't have too many up here. But pretty much any animal, again, that makes contact with the ground or anything that makes contact with anything else, there's a law of transfer that there's going to be an impression left. There's going to be part of that track maker left in that environment, and there's going to be part of that environment that is taken with the track maker. So we are basically looking for signs of any animal that has been in the area, and we're also able to distinguish different species. So let's say a coyote from a red fox by the morphology, by the shape, size, and other characteristics of the foot when it touches the ground and the impressions that it leaves. There are distinguishing characteristics between those two species, just like there are distinguishing characteristics between the outsole tread pattern that humans wear.
So when it comes to tracking either humans or animals too, how can you tell how old the tracks are? So say you're tracking somebody who's lost in the woods, how can you tell that the tracks that you're finding are actually fresh and you're on the right trail?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And the whole science of aging, so a good friend of mine who is retired as a conservation officer, his name is Mike Hall, and he also wrote a book on human tracking. He describes tracking as a complex application of simplicities. And so one of the complexities of tracking is aging, is determining the age of the track. How long has this track been here? And one of the tools, we use several tools for that. One of the tools is to look at the weather history, at the recent weather history, to see has it been raining or snowing or the wind blowing, or did dew settle and collect overnight or this morning, and those kinds of aging factors, influencers. And then we'll also, when we find a track that we want to determine the age of, we'll put our own track down. That's called an index track or a test track. So we'll put our test track down and compare the characteristics of that test track with the track in question to see how close they are. And usually that means the track in question is fresher, or how different they are, and usually that means the track in question is older. And then just practice, and what we call dirt time. Dirt time is a term that means practice, basically, of going out and laying out tracks and watching them age through different conditions, different seasons, on different ground covers, and building that library, that file cabinet of experience in your own mind. So those are the three main tools that we tend to combine to determine the age of a track.
Interesting.
Very cool. So getting into that human tracking, right? So one question I had was, way back ago, they were able to track down, prey animals, and nowadays we can track down people and other animals. But my question is, has there been any impact on technology for the science of tracking?
Can you rephrase that? So impact on technologies,
or impact on tracking from technologies, right?
There we go. Okay, cool. So yes and no.
Okay.
In my mind, there have been new technologies that help out tracking. One of which is not a new technology, but a flashlight, as opposed to a candle or natural light or moonlight that can be used or help emphasize and help us detect tracks. So a flashlight is one of the tracker's favorite tools, one of our main tools. But other technologies can help, but not a whole lot, in all honesty, besides our own brain and ability to detect different changes to the ground itself. So one technology that does come to mind when you ask that question is a software that was developed as one of the original apps about 30 years ago, and I already mentioned Cybertracker Conservation. Cybertracker was and still is the name of that app, and that app was developed so that illiterate persons can enter information into then the Palm Pilot that was connected with a GPS chip to geolocate the source of the information. And the person using this app, the Cybertracker app, could basically punch icons on the screen on the Palm Pilot. So they would punch in an icon on that to say, hey, I see kudu tracks here, and there are 3 of them, and how old the tracks are, and which way they're going, and then again locate with GPS. And that app has been used through decades of use around the world now to gather data and help manage wildlife management and make decisions for those populations.
Really? Yeah. So people going out and getting tracking information, which helps population and ultimately policy decisions on conservation.
Exactly.
That's all being impacted by people just going out and tracking down animals.
Observing. Well, not just tracking down the animals, but seeing what kind of tracks and sign are present. So if there are recent tracks here to say there's mountain lions that like to cross a highway in this area, then we can log that and locate that, and with historical data, so with that data accumulating over time, again, that can show a population trend and tendency and affect maybe where a land bridge is going across the highway to protect both the animal and traffic.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Now, maybe this is too much of specificity, but can you think of any case studies where this has particularly been used either for conservation or interactions of humans and animals?
It's an awesome question. I wish I could bring something to mind. So with the link that I'll give you for Cybertracker Conservation, I know that resource has plenty of those resources available. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. We'll look at those and maybe add them to our website so that people can see some of the impacts that tracking has on policymaking.
Actually,
Do you have any?
Yeah, I did actually have a question. So a lot of your tracking, you're talking about going into the wilderness, of course, going into like the woods, what have you. How does that change when you come across like a watery environment, like a lake or a river, or perhaps even like a rocky environment, like a cave or rocky cliffside?
Excellent. So those are more difficult environments, and so water environments. So let's go to the case of looking for a missing person, and that would be. We'll use tracking to see along the border of the water to see if we could find where the person came out. So if they were last seen on a boat or on a kayak or something and in or on a water body, and if we can find sign or tracks of them coming out, then we don't need to dive that water to look in the water for them. So that's one way to work in those. And then the other more difficult ground covers that you're talking about, it often comes down to looking at the boundary of that to see if we can find an exit from that area. But there are ways to track somebody across hard surfaces, concrete or rock or other hard surfaces. And one of those would be the concept of transfer material, where if I step on or in a substance like mud, blood, water, oil, anything that sticks to a shoe, and then I walk across a hard surface, that substance will rub off on that hard surface, and that can give an indication both of the presence of the person as well as the direction of travel from that source material to where we find the tracks and point to where they may be.
Okay, so transferring substances, right? I assume that would translate to, say, we do a lot of tracking in the wilderness, but what about like urban searches for missing people? Can you also utilize your tracking experience for that?
Yes, absolutely. So anytime somebody steps somewhere, they have to leave 2 things behind. They have to leave scent and they have to leave tracks. And we're not very good as humans at detecting the scent, and canines do that. And we work hand in hand with canines, but they don't do so well on the visual tracks, and that's what we can work on. That's because sight is our dominant sense. And so we look at, in tracking, we take into consideration what we call baseline, or the normal, naturally occurring conditions before somebody walks across that. And so looking at those baseline conditions, when we get used to that and kind of key in on those conditions, then we look for disturbance to that, changes to that baseline. And that, regardless of the surface, whether it's the rocks or a shallow stream or grass or woods or pine forest or any woods, when we tune into the natural conditions and look for the disturbances to that, then we can start to sort out, okay, that's deer track, that's bear track, or hey, this is a human footprint, and then going back to the aging aspect of it, build the layers that compile the story to answer the age-old question of what happened here. And that's the primary mystery of tracking is to answer that question. The primary objective of tracking is to answer that question.
Huh? Very cool. Tom.
So you mentioned using tracking dogs sometimes as well. So in popular media, you'll see like somebody had a shirt of somebody who's missing. They have a dog smell it, and then the dog just instantly takes off. How accurate is that?
That's very accurate.
Really?
But
Okay.
it's not the complete picture. So for canine work, and again, I mostly work with the 2 legs, less with the 4 legs, but for a search mission, we'll work together, and I've worked together enough with instructors to get a broad brushstroke idea of canine capabilities as well as limitations. And a lot of dogs are trained, like you suggest, to take a clue, a scent article, and get a unique scent signature from that, and then look or smell for that scent signature and indicate, and when they find that signature in body language and maybe other cues for the dog to tell the handler, hey, I've got it, and then to follow it. That's their natural instinct. Dogs aren't trained to follow scents. They just do that naturally. And then there are other canine disciplines that may not be that type of the trailing dog, they're called, that are scent discriminating. But there are other mechanisms for canines to work specifically to find missing people, and one is a non-scent discriminating training where they are basically out to look for any human in the woods, or at any location, not just woods. So when they pick up on a human scent, they will work what's called a scent cone, a typical dispersion pattern of scent from a source or from a person. They will work through that cone to get to the source, which is hopefully the person that we're looking for.
Okay.
But it could be any person because they're not scent discriminating, so they could, if somebody's out in the woods, they're a pretty good resource to find.
I was going to ask that if you've ever had a case where you had a dog track somebody down and it turned out to just be a hiker or a camper or something.
Yes, lots of times. And so the dog handler in those cases will reward the dog, say, good job, you did what you trained for, now we got to go look for somebody else.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
next person out in the woods. Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Very cool. So let me ask you, if someone was interested in tracking, how would they get started?
Awesome question. So there are a number of ways to get into tracking. One of which is to, as you mentioned before, the books, is to start looking and reading in books, and those are good teaching mechanisms that give you the basics about any skill, really. And then there are schools that are available, and for tracking humans, there are basically 3 main not categories, but classes of people or resources that would use tracking to find missing people, and those are search and rescue, law enforcement, and military. And the only difference in my mind between those 3 is what is done with the person when they find them. So there are different schools that address the different applications of tracking. So those tracking is following those disturbances, following the footprints, following the sign, following the damage to leaves, and or any ground disturbance. And once that person is found, then how they apply that, the result of the tracking, that differs for those 3 resources. But there are different schools that will take tracking and apply it. So there's schools that apply tracking to search and rescue, or schools that apply tracking in a tactical manner for law enforcement, and a different tactical manner for military resources. And my school is one of those that teaches more from the search and rescue perspective. I also work with, again, my friend Mike Hall and other resources to take tactical tracking to law enforcement and military schools as well.
Wow. So there's almost like subcategories of the tracking that you have, similar to like academic studies themselves, where you really get into the nuances
Yes.
of what you're studying and looking for.
Yes, so we will work to, from a scientific perspective, we will work to characterize an individual by their tracks. And that starts with measuring footwear and outsoles and tread patterns and footprints on the ground. And so we'll get several measurements of that, a length and a width and heel measurements and then measurements of the tread pattern itself. So characterizing individual by that data. And then we'll also get what we call gait measurements, which are like measuring the distance between the footfalls, the step length, and measuring how far apart the feet are spread, or measuring the straddle, and measuring the angle that somebody's foot pitches out or pitches in. And all of those dimensions, all of those measurements combined typically uniquely characterize an individual that we can separate out from most other people just based on those measurements.
Wow.
So if somebody were to get lost in the wilderness, what can they do to help trackers find them?
First off, stay still. So stay put. There's a Hug a Tree program that was developed by a former Border Patrol tracker at Taylor and other resources that developed a Hug a Tree program to teach people, mostly children, but anybody really, that a stationary target is easier to find than a moving target. So staying still, making yourself known, making yourself visible, and when resources go looking for you, that you have either sight, sound, or scent that are being put out there for people to find. So starting a fire and wearing bright clothing and maybe even take a whistle with you so that you can blow that whistle, a small little tool that can help people find you a whole lot quicker. And then there's a huge leave no trace moment, and I appreciate, or movement, and I appreciate that movement and the efforts and the conservation techniques that they espouse and teach. So I joke about a leave more trace movement, that if you're going to get lost, if you leave lots of sign, we can track to you faster. So there's that. But having the equipment and the training and the expertise and the planning to go out on a wilderness expedition, which I advise people to do regularly, get out and learn and see and experience. But first thing to do is to tell somebody where you're going, because if somebody comes up missing and they haven't told anybody where they're going, it's going to take us longer to get to you and find you. If you have told somebody, hey, this is my intended destination, this is how I intend to get there, this is when I expect to get back, and if I don't get back a couple hours after that, then start sending resources, and that will help us get there quicker. I will joke with my wife about going to the mailbox, and I should be back in 5 minutes. If I'm not back in 7 minutes, then call 911.
So, being explicit with that information, I have a question about the opposite of that, right? So you're really good at tracking people down, right? Mm-hmm. So you know what to look for.
Yes.
So could you go out into the woods and cover your tracks from another tracker finding you?
Yes, I could. Yes, I could. And that's about as far as I'm going to go with that. I don't want to teach people how to do that, but once you know what to look for, then you know when conditions are hard, when it's more difficult to follow somebody, and when it's easier to follow somebody, and those can be managed often. Unless
Very
you're in
cool.
4 inches of snow, and then there isn't much you can do about it.
Yeah. Okay. I just have a couple more questions then. So, with these skills, do you think if I put you out in the woods that you could track down some food?
Yes.
Perfect.
I have, and I'm not a hunter myself, so, but I just enjoy the heck out of tracking, no matter, again, whether it's 2-legged or 4-legged, prey or quarry. Let's go with quarry. Yes, I've tracked down animals of 2 legs, of 4 legs, and it's quite exhilarating to be out in the woods and experience that, because especially for the 4-legged animals, the bear and the deer and elk and other animals that live in the wilderness and are totally attuned to what's going on with them. If they weren't, they'd be eaten quickly. So they are paying attention. They are looking for predators to come after them. And so being able to find a trail that's relatively fresh and then follow that trail to the animal and see the animal is fantastic. And one of the goals of the Cybertracker organization and the testing process that they conduct for certification is that you can find a fresh trail, follow it to the animal, observe the animal, and leave without the animal knowing you're there. That's a perfect score, and it's phenomenally difficult. It is as difficult as it sounds, if not more so. But to be able to do that is exhilarating. It's a lot of fun and tough.
That sounds significantly tough, but I suppose maybe or maybe not I'll learn some more of that.
I think you will. Certain you will.
And then maybe one last one for our listeners. Do you have any cool stories about tracking you would like to share or tell the listeners about?
So there have been a number of people that I have found tracks and given an indication which way they went, and resources were sent there and found them, and that's phenomenal in and of itself. And there are a handful where I have found tracks of them and followed those tracks and found the missing persons themselves. And so I usually tell a story about an individual that became paranoid because of consuming a narcotic, consuming a drug, and he ran off into the woods. And he had already done a little bit of harm to himself, but we and this is a team effort. It's not just myself. So it's huge philosophy in my mind to have people realize that the lone wolf tracker is a figment of TV's imagination. That there are a lot of entertaining stories out there, but the real finds that are made as a team effort, as different resources, the canines, the helicopter, the people on the ground, and trackers also working together to find this person. And this one story was no exception to that. And there were, on this particular search, when we found an initial set of tracks and direction to travel, we started managing the resources and sending them down, and pretty much every team on that effort found tracks of this individual, as well as articles of clothing that the individual was leaving behind. And at first, the missing person had been going down a drainage and walking along a sort of a muddy ditch, so the tracks were relatively easy to find, but interspersed with 100 or 200 yards of not being able to find any tracks. And so we would send resources ahead, and they would pick up on the tracks. And then this person, for some reason, still unknown to date, totally changed the person's behavior. Where they had been going in a particular direction down this drainage, this person, for some reason, decided to go up a ridge and started traveling up through Mountain Laurel and rhododendron and deciduous forest, and became a lot more difficult to follow the tracks. And there weren't any muddy footprints anymore. There were basically leaf disturbances and some broken twigs and some things that didn't look like deer or bear, but were big enough to go, all right, let's keep following this stuff. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, dark, and we had been informed that there was a warrant out for this individual's arrest. So we had a deputy with us for security. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I put my flashlight out ahead of where I was looking at the trail on the ground, and saw a log that had no bark on it, which turned out to be this guy's leg. And so I called out his name, said, "Hey, are you okay?" He goes, "No, I'm cold." I said, "You're fine, you're breathing, you're responding." And I turned to the deputy and said, "He is all yours." So that was near the end of that story, except for walking him out was also quite an adventure. That was a happy ending. He was hypothermic. He had been missing for 60 hours by the time we started working on that trail, and it took about 14 hours to find him, and that was exhilarating, and definitely brought together all the teamwork of the resources working together to find clues to point to his direction to travel, and eventually, and may have saved his life because he was hypothermic. He was very cold. And we got him out, and he didn't have many articles of clothing left. He had left a lot throughout the woods, but no, that was a great experience, and brought it all together and made all the training and effort worthwhile to find him.
That's amazing. Odd behavior. That's almost like another whole science of lost
Oh,
person
absolutely.
behavior.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a whole nother conversation we can have about the statistics that are compiled to show patterns of behavior that we can use to help us find lost persons. But it boils down to individual behaviors, and those can be quite different, quite erratic. So I wear lots of hats. This is one of the search and rescue groups in the state, and they were going to try to twist Joel's arm into joining eventually. But and then I wear my business, and then I wear a VDEM, Department of Emergency Management, instructor for them. So lots of and then the Cybertracker thing. I'm becoming an evaluator. I'm an evaluator in training. So
I mean, you won't have to twist my arm that hard. It's ever since we tracked down those coyotes.
right.
Well, not track them down, but
Wait,
track the coyotes.
followed them.
I was like,
Followed
oh
them.
man, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
Incidentally, if you go tracking again this winter. you
Oh,
should.
buddy. If snow comes down, and if I'm here, we're going.
All right, you just let me know.
Yeah, for sure.
I will add though. So Rob, is there anything else you would like to plug for our listeners?
Absolutely. So I'm the lead instructor and founder of the Natural Awareness Tracking School, which I started in 2002, after a few years of working for Virginia Department of Emergency Management. And we teach a lot of different classes. We teach animal tracking classes. We teach human tracking classes. Teach some navigation, a lot of map and compass skills and search and rescue skills, as well as lost person behavior. So I'll give you a website link for that.
Awesome, great. Well, we'll be happy to share it with our listeners.
All right. That's-
All right. Do you have anything else you want to plug? Anything at all?
Oh yeah. So lots of. Let's see which one. So I'm an officer with the Search and Rescue Tracking Institute, which is one of 20 some groups certified by the Virginia Department of Emergency Management to respond to searches for missing persons. And the Search and Rescue Tracking Institute, aka SARTI, is a group that specifically dedicates our training time to following human tracks and sign. And we also work on being aware of animal tracks and sign, because I have yet to, in over 300 documented searches, work a search in which there were no animal tracks or sign whatsoever. So being familiar with animal tracks and sign actually helps the people find, follow, or even eliminate clues that might have been interpreted as being made by the missing person. So SARTI meets quarterly, every 3 months in different places around Virginia, and new members are welcome all the time.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And I would say, if you are a lost listener out there, maybe email Rob, he'll track you down.
Send a picture of your tread path. That will help. Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, that's amazing. I think that's all the questions I have.
That's all the questions I had too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Joel. Very
And
much
we
for
really appreciate you coming on this podcast. And as we said, we're going to put all of Rob's information up on our website. So if you have more interest, they can contact you.
Yes.
Oh, yes, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so you
Yeah.
can contact Rob.
Email address, website. I'll give you guys all that
Perfect,
information.
great.
Yep.
And I know I personally am looking forward to learning a little bit more about tracking here soon, Rob.
Awesome. Very good. See you in class this weekend.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.